Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Alyssa and I are being joined by Sue Gem today, and we're going to be talking about a variety of different topics, but mostly centered around women in the different generations and how we respond to all the things that we're going through being working women, stay at home moms, volunteering, fulfilling our faith life, as well as all the social activities and managing all the different parts of our lives. In this conversation, we have what I would consider three distinct generations. Um, Alyssa is our youngin. She's a millennial. I'm sort of the middle person with maybe age 55. And Sue doesn't need to tell us how old she is, but she is older than I am. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sue. Sue is a friend of mine, a colleague in the work world. We've interacted probably in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years. It's getting to know each other during our work world and interacting in different organizations that we both have been a part of. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sue, and she's going to do a more formal introduction with the background that she'd like to share with us before we go ahead and get started.
Yeah, my name is Sue Gem, and I have I guess I'm on the side of the working woman that I think I'm officially retired now from full-time work. So my career started back in the early 80s. I was a teacher for about 25 years. I taught in the elementary schools, both in a nonprofit school, a Lutheran school to be exact. I taught elementary school there, and then I substitute taught in public schools for many years. And after leaving education, I did some work in nonprofits. Most of my work has been in the nonprofit world, and my most recent job was about 11 years in a medical society, which was also nonprofit. So anyway, I've now retired. I do a little part-time work on my own on the side, but for the most part, I'm retired.
I had reached out to Sue because we've had some very interesting conversations about just the changing work experience and given the varied relationship that women have had with work and family in the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years, and talking about the different experiences. One of the things that Sue and I had talked about was one of the common or consistent threads in her life has been the role of volunteering and securing help for the different organizations that she's been a part of. And she just started sharing about some information about some of the women that she's encountered in the last, I would say, 5 years plus, and just sharing and reflecting some of those observations. And so, Sue, can you give us a little bit of information on what you were describing to me? And then Alyssa and I will sort of probe and ask you some questions and sort of flush it out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, actually, pretty recently, there was a group discussion. It was in our church. We were talking about the role of volunteers and trying to get some of the programming that our parents, especially, rely on. And we were just talking about just the different ways to try to boost volunteerism. And one of the subjects that came up was that the parents in this generation of raising children just seem to be overwhelmed and don't have the time to give to participating, not only volunteering, but just participating in general. And it just really sort of struck me in that conversation. And the person that was leading the conversation was had just turned 30 years old, and so I asked the question, what is it that is making people of this generation raising kids now feeling this way? And the answer was, the cost of living, both people are working. Cost of living came up, quite a bit. And it just made me stop to think. And I came home from that conversation and really thought about it. And I thought, is it really that different these days than it was when I was raising my kids? My children are in their 30s now. It doesn't seem that long ago that I was the young mom with kids in grade school, high school. And here I am on this end of it, but I really had to stop to think, is it really that different? And I am just really curious as to what um, young parents raising kids these days find so what they might perceive as so different from maybe what their parents experienced.
So, naturally, Alyssa, we're going to get you involved because you are the young mom in this conversation, and I know you've said many times before that you can't speak for a whole generation, and so not asking you to do that, but if you, um, what do you think of the comment that that young parent had said in the group discussion that it was taking place in the church, and those comments that that mom made in terms of her feelings? Do you agree with that? Disagree? Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I know that we are just having a discussion about, um, in our last podcast, we were kind of talking about this a little bit. So I was kind of chuckling to myself only because of the fact that, so I'm a little bit closer to 40, and so I am considered a millennial, but at the same time, I think that, um, I don't know. I think that there are subtle differences. And so I see this very much in some of the younger, so that's about 10 years younger than me. I see a lot of discussions about, oh, the cost of living, like it's so bad. And I honestly am from the perspective of I I don't think that's the crux of it. So I think it's interesting that somebody would say that. I don't know that I have the specific area, but I can say, like, from my perspective, I don't think it's the cost of living. I think that it is a matter of priorities and how um I do think that some of the younger generations do feel overwhelmed. I know I feel overwhelmed a lot of times, but I don't equate it with cost of living. I think I equate it more with um, like the increase in social media and just having like so much at our fingertips all the time that it feels like, there's just so many options that it's like I don't know where to go to first. But I don't think that it's a lack of wanting to help because I was thinking as we were kind of preparing for this conversation, I was like, a lot of times we're seeing that movement, like we talked about in our previous episode about like gifts and like people are talking about experiences and wanting to help others and like be more, um, I don't know if it's necessarily like volunteering, but like just be more giving in general. And so I think that there is a desire to be better people, but I think that the overwhelm kind of, if it's not right in front of you and right at your fingertips and easily accessible, I don't think that the younger generations yeah, are like chomping at the bit for it. So I know that's a lot, but I don't know if that's helpful in like giving some perspective, but I would say that those are like some of my initial thoughts.
And you know what? If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in here a little bit
Yeah.
because I think we've talked about before the fact that, Alyssa, you're at the older end of the millennial generation, and my daughter is the youngest of that generation, and she's 27. And so I sort of feel like I have 2 cents to put in this because my daughter spends a lot of time almost not necessarily anxious about, standard of living, but just the fact that, she owes this money for grad school. She's making and I keep reminding her that she probably is making 3 times the amount of money I made with my master's degree, but I picked social work, she picked nursing, very 2 different very fields. But I think that what I have pointed out to her, talking about the stress of the cost of living, is the fact that And you and I have talked about this before, Alyssa, in the sense that, identifying very clearly where your priorities are and where you spend your money. And so my daughter will not think twice about ordering out every single day and having the food delivered to her. Whereas, like, I think would go pick up the food because I don't want to pay a surcharge for delivery. She does not think about that at all. And so I think that there are priorities or choices that people make that then take up the discretionary income that they have. And because they justify or, convince themselves that they're so busy and this is like a luxury that they feel like gives them a little bit of relief for their day, um, and the price tag is not as important. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to my child. I'm saying this, what I've said to her numerous times, which is that, like the rest of us did when we were trying to manage our money and figure out where the money is going to, you sort of create a budget and you sort of, identify where is the money you're making, and where are you spending it, because then you have the information to know what do you cut back on. But I don't know if there's that much of a recognition. I do know also from recruiting young doctors into this market for so many years. I mean, the cost of buying a house in these areas is a lot higher for a starter home. So even when I was recruiting physicians here, they would look at the cost of the homes in this area and say, well, this is really not the starter home price range I was thinking about. And then we would have a discussion about, okay, where can you live reasonably without having to move too far away. But they're not some of the neighborhoods that are very established and have, four-bedroom homes and, a pool in the backyard and all these kinds of things. And they, I think, are a little bit more readily available to that because they've got school loans to kind of figure out how do they get a mortgage in addition to all the other things that they're trying to do. And I will say that most of those folks didn't necessarily have children when I was trying to recruit them here. But I do wonder if some of the younger families are biting off more than they can handle and then feeling the pressure of their choices all adding up. I think I see a smaller version of that with my daughter who is unmarried, who doesn't own a home, but does have large school bills, and is working, somewhat of a difficult schedule, and trying to understand, like, how does she make it all fit? So, I guess I'm curious to hear how either one of you respond to my thoughts about my 27-year-old and sort of my reflections of the conversations I've had with her.
I was gonna say real quickly, and then I want to hear Sue what you think as well. I would say that I think that it's because we talked a little bit before about like the evolution developmentally. Like I think that I mean, if I when looking back when I was 25, 27, like my priorities were definitely skewed as a compared to like now being, married and having 4 kids and working full time. And like I think your perspective and your priorities shift as you get older. And so I think that that's maybe why, like for me, I have these young children, I'm trying to establish for them like volunteering, in particular, like it's something that we try to do more of and give back because I'm trying to teach my kids like the importance of that. And so I think that it like again the priority shifted only because I got older and wasn't as much like focused on myself as like a singular person. Now I have a family and I think that that also shifted some of the perspective. So I think it depends on who we're talking about too.
Yeah, I think, Alyssa, something you said earlier kind of struck me, and I wrote it down. You have so many options. And I think that that is a big part of what we're talking about today is, even when I think back to when I first started teaching back in the early 80s, most of the parents had, they sent their kids to school. We didn't have, well, and I taught school in Chicago on the south side of the city. And these parents didn't have the opportunities to present to their kids the way we have them here. And when we moved to the suburbs, we moved to St. Charles when our children were very small. And it really struck me at how much more was available to kids living in this community. And then you add on the fact that many of them were from more wealthy families, and the parents could provide an awful lot to their kids. One of my son's best friends was always in a sport, and for 12 months out of almost at 13 months, 12 months out of the year, he was involved in a sport, which was all very costly, and it cost the parents a lot of time and money to go on all these trips that they went on with traveling soccer, traveling baseball, football, and you name it. So the options, and I think it probably has increased even since my kids were that age. So the options that are available are huge. And I think the other thing that always kind of struck me was just how much time and effort goes into looking at colleges for our kids. And I just almost kind of laugh about that now. It's like, when we were younger, at least when I was younger, my parents said, "Which school do you want to go to? And we'll sign you up." And that was that. I mean, and now we go on these elaborate college visits, and I'm not saying any of that is wrong. I mean, I'm not in judgment of that, but it all takes time and money and eats away our at our time that we may want to give to a benevolent situation or participate in something, but we just can't because we're so tied up with these obligations that we have created with our children. I remember when I was the younger mom, and I was more of a stay-at-home mom. I did work part-time when my kids were young, but I did have time available to me. And when I would try to recruit volunteers to help with things, whether it was PTA or PTO or whatever it was, whenever I heard other people my age use their children as an excuse, uh, that used to really bother me. I mean, there are always reasons if your children are sick or, you have commitments with them, but oftentimes I would hear that, kind of as an excuse more than a reason. So, um, anyway, those are the things that kind of jump out at me. But
And I think that all three of us can look back on our parenting conversations with our friends or in our social circle or whatever network you have, and there are the group of I believe this is my personal opinion is that there's a group of people that I know almost are overscheduled and over busy. There's almost like um, this need to have your children in everything. And I just remember when my daughter played, she was in gymnastics for 8 years, and we spent a lot of time in gymnastics because she really enjoyed it and she did a lot of it. And I just remember like the families that would have their child doing gymnastics and would have their baseball uniform in a gym bag, and then the children are, changing from their gymnastics outfit to their baseball outfit, and then they were running to a baseball game or whatever. And the same, it wasn't even like they have, if you have two or three children and you want to keep all of your children in activities, you take turns taking them to different activities. This was actually the same child doing lots of different things, and it just felt like they were on a different track. And then when I moved out to this area, then what I found is that the stakes were a lot higher. I mean, I met a mom whose son played baseball in Arizona. I went to all these celebrity baseball camps because, that's the levels she thought he was going to play at. And she was thinking about college recruitment, and you needed to be in Arizona. So they were thinking of moving to Arizona in high school so he could already be in high school in Arizona when he was going to be applying to colleges. And I just thought to myself, wow, like I must be living under a rock because I am just taking it one day at a time. And I don't know, it just felt like so much pressure and so much stress that just the conversation was eliciting in me. So I don't know. I sort of feel like there's a lot of different factors, and not that I didn't want my child to be successful. I don't think that I projected that she was going to be an athletic star or that she was going to be, a scholar of some sort. But I do feel like there is that that pace is very different when you talk to a certain contingent of our community here. And I think that each parent has the ability to feed into that or to maybe walk away from that and not foreshadow your children. And I don't know. That's what I pick up. Now, Alyssa, as a young mom, with a range of children from 8 to 2 months, what are you feeling? Do you have conversations like that with your peers who are raising children at the same age? Or do you think that you missed it or is still coming? Or where do you feel like you are?
No, so I definitely think that, like you said, there's a subset of parents who are like, that's what they do is they kind of like overbook themselves. It's funny because it goes back to like that minimalism, like that I'm always like trying to foster. Whereas, as much as I'm trying to like declutter my house, I'm also trying to declutter, my mind and my schedule and things like that. And so I'm really making sure that I'm making conscious decisions about what activities we're doing and what we're not doing. And I'm really fostering like that identity of we're not going to be overbooked because I know that it creates too much stress for me and doesn't allow me to have that time to do the things that are important. Like, like I was saying, like, volunteering and doing things like that. And so I think that there's different subsets. I know that I'm consciously making an effort to make sure that I'm not overbooked. Um, but I think that that's a conscious decision that I'm making for my family. And like I just had a experience with that last week where there was a day and my son had like a Boy Scout event, later in the evening, and we all got home and we were just all exhausted. I was like, "You know what? As much as like I'd like to be able to take you to this, like we're just going to stay home today because everybody's tired and nobody's going to have that much fun if we're all just like pushing through. Let's just go and have like a low key evening." And so I think that there's something to be said about, making a conscious effort to limit those things. I have 4 kids, 2 of which are in active activities, but we tell them get 1 activity a season, and that's it. And so that I'm not over, my husband and I are not just like running from thing to thing to thing. Because that's not the lifestyle I want. But I definitely see our friends who maybe have 1 or 2 kids and their kids are in everything. And so I think that it depends on the person, but I do think that that makes a difference in whether people are going to expand out or say, "Yes, I have time to do something," versus, "No, I don't have time." It's a conscious effort that or a conscious decision to do or not do those things.
Yeah, and I do think that the young parents who that are talking to you, I just wonder if they're being really honest about what the reason is that they can't, participate. And I'm not saying that they have to make um, faith volunteering the most important thing in their life. And I don't think you're doing that either. I think the question is that there's a prioritization of what you choose to invest your time in, and all of us have the same amount of time. And given the circumstances you're talking about, if you look at Alyssa, myself, and you, we all of us have worked outside the home at least part time. We all have spouses that work, and are co-managing our children with us. We as women all have the responsibility of, making sure that the kids were taken care of and that there was food on the table when there needed to be and that the laundry was done and that people were moving. So this idea that a young person says, they're overwhelmed, I don't really know how that was different than when Sue, you were a young mom, and Alyssa, you're a young mom now with 4 children, and I was a young mom, with only 1 child, but still, you know, had a busy life. You're still trying to keep your social life alive. You're trying to have some kind of a relationship with your spouse, and are trying to have a religious life if that's a priority to you. So I'm not really sure, Sue, like what has changed with somebody who's in their 30s versus when I was 30, you were 30, or Alyssa was 30. I think that's the part that I'm sort of struggling to understand.
Well, and I think that that's what I was trying to be honoring of the person who was leading the discussion. I didn't want to, I just wanted to listen and I wanted to be respectful of if they really thought that. But in my heart of hearts, I was just sort of doing a little chuckle because I thought, well, you didn't live in my shoes 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It was just we were working too, and raising kids, and but we've talked about things like priorities, and I think that one of the things that I wrote down as I was listening to what you guys were saying was, in our house we had non-negotiables. And there were just not a lot of them. I mean, maybe 3 or 4 things that were just non-negotiable, and one was dinner together.
Yeah, us too.
And that was just a non-negotiable. Worshiping on Sunday was a non-negotiable. We didn't even talk about it as a family. It's just what we did. And those were just our priorities. But uh, way back when I taught second grade many years ago, I still remember a story that the children had to read, and it was a father speaking to his 7-year-old daughter, and the little girl kept saying, "Daddy, I don't have that. I don't have the time. I don't have the time for that. I don't have time to clean my room. I don't have time." And the story just went on about all the little things this little 7-year-old girl said she didn't have time for. And the father said to her, "You have the time if you make the time." Now, I was teaching this to second graders at the time, and I can't tell you what a great impression that made on me as the teacher. And I've never forgotten it because that's the bottom line. You have the time if you make the time. And it all goes back to those priorities, the things you find very valuable and important. And I do think that we can get so caught up in all of the extracurriculars, on top of school, on top of working, and it just becomes overwhelming. And I can see that when you get to a Saturday or Sunday, and a lot of times the volunteer or the participatory things, even when I worked for the medical society and I would see my doctors, I mean, they were just exhausted, and our things were in the evening, and they're just so tired, and we all get tired. But it's interesting because our society wants these things. We want these programs for our kids. We want these things to happen so that they have value added to their life. And yet all of them require participation, and they all require volunteering. And yet, though most organizations, if you ask, are struggling to find the people to help fill those roles. So I don't know. I think as a little bit of an older parent now, I just want to. I guess I want to be an advocate for the younger parents, and I feel sorry for them that they feel so overwhelmed. But to just be sympathetic and empathetic toward them, and to reassure them that things aren't that different, but it really does come down to our choices, basically.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I think it's really challenging because when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to be objective and it's hard to feel like you're not drowning. But I do believe that, getting a little perspective and and I don't think, I think it's really difficult when you're in it, for it to sound so simple. Like you just need to, reprioritize what it is you're doing. Just like it is when I had conversations with my daughter to say, you need to reprioritize your spending and that way you will have less stress, right? I mean, if that's what is creating the most amount of stress, and then how do you create a plan to reduce that? The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and try to get a different result. So therefore, something needs to change, and only you're in control of making that change. Right. And I think that lesson is true for this conversation as well. If you're overwhelmed, what is creating that overwhelmedness? And then how do you reduce that? And but I think that if you're hearing that information as a parent who's trying to do everything and be everything, it probably sounds like you're being patronized, and that's not the impact, but it is a life lesson that I don't know how you can dress it up or dress it down, but that's just the reality of it. And we do that to ourselves. And I think that the other part that Alyssa and I talk about a lot, and we talked about it, in our last podcast that we just recently recorded, is that we pass on these behaviors and these expectations to our children, unknowingly. And so we're creating very anxious children because of what we're role modeling to them based on what we are putting in front of our children and expecting from them as well. And that is something that we need to fully acknowledge as parents, is that we set the tone for our children. And last thing any parent wants is a child who's burned out by the time that they're in high school, or the fact that, they're applying. I had a parent tell me when you were talking about colleges, Sue, that they applied to 25 colleges. Just the
Mm.
cost alone, just
Oh
the
my
cost
goodness.
alone to apply to 25 colleges and to go visit them, to me was like, how do you work and do that? Who has that much vacation time? And so, I mean, things are just extraordinary anymore. And so I do feel like there's got to be some kind of, limit or some kind of reasonability that goes along with it. But, definitely I feel like there should be a cautionary note about transferring this anxiety to the children and leading them to down a path that is unsustainable in many, many ways. I don't know what you guys think about that. Hopefully, I'm not being dramatic, but I do think that there's a tone of caution that I would put out there.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in because I think that, I mean, both of what you what both of you have said rings very true to me. And I appreciate both perspectives. I was kind of chuckling over here because I think probably I'm going to say about 6 years ago, I'm pretty sure that somebody probably said something similar to what you said, Sue. You make time for, or you have the time. I'm paraphrasing, so I apologize, but like you have time if you make time. And I think that I was like, I don't have the time. I can't physically find it. But that's why I say like about 6 years ago, but like now, even though I feel like in some ways I'm in a busier phase of life because I have prioritized differently. I do have time for those things. And again, 6 years ago, I would have been like, I don't have time for this. So I do think that there's a lot to be learned or taken away from this conversation. But I think that it definitely is dependent on people being able to say, yeah, as the kids are going to yell in the background. I think that there's definitely something to be said about, if you make the time, you can do the things that are important to you.
And it might mean saying no to something else. You can't say yes to everything. And I think one of the things I learned many years ago was the whole idea of boundaries and just saying, okay, it's hard to make a decision when all of your choices are good things, when they're all good. I mean, it's easy to say, that's not any good, so I don't have to do that. But when you've got a plate full of really good chocolate, how do you pick the one you're going to have? So, a lot of times the things we're talking about are all good things. And then to prioritize the one that's best is really hard. But knowing what your limit is too,
Right.
knowing I need 7 hours of sleep in order to function the next day. So knowing what your boundaries are, what you're physically capable of, and then kind of working a schedule around that. I know for my own boys, I have my youngest is 32, my oldest is 36, and they have just kind of cut social media completely out of their diet. And my son, my older one, said, he was finding that he was spending so much time scrolling through mostly Instagram, I think, more than Facebook. And he's like, why am I doing this? This is such a waste of time. This isn't producing anything. And he just kind of found it kind of silly for himself. So he and his wife just cut that out of their life. Um, and they also go to bed about 8:30 at night too. They're up very early in the morning, but they go to bed early. And I will say I've learned a lot just watching him, where he really knows his limits. He knows his limits. And I would say they live a pretty full life and they both work full time. But I think it's cutting back and just saying, hey, I don't have to do everything my friends are doing. I don't have to do all that. It's not good for me.
The other thing that I'll say too is that both Sue and you probably too, Alyssa, I don't know where you are in terms of being involved with organizations where you're trying to recruit people to backfill positions. So, in the roles that, and I know Sue better in terms of her volunteering than I do, Alyssa, you're volunteering. I know a little bit of what you do. But the point that I'm trying to make is that um, in my role on the Lions Club, one of the things that is one of our stated goals is to bring in the younger generation into the legacy of the Lions. And so in that role, one of the things that we have found is that there are civic minded people in their 30s and 40s that are wanting to continue the tradition of their family. And so their parents were, their father might have been a lion, their grandfather might have been a lion, just almost like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and how that kind of goes. But what I have found is that as great as it has been to get some of these younger folks in because of their commitment to their community and the Lions Club, we actually haven't seen them volunteer their time in the activities that we need help with. So I think that's an interesting kind of a thing too. They rose to the occasion to become part of the organization because somebody in their family had a strong connection to this organization. But when it comes to filling up the schedule for volunteer time, they're busy with their family activities and they're working as well. And so I think we go back to the same point of, we're trying to, because all of us at some point in an organization has to do succession planning, right? You have to think about who's going to carry the torch for the next 20 years or 30 years. And we're trying to seed the younger folks to do that because some folks are going out because they're retiring and they're moving on with their elder years. And so it's sort of like the change of guard, but you're sort of seeing that they voice an interest. But when it comes time to deliver, they're busy with other activities. So I'm finding sort of like, oh, I was really hopeful a year ago. And now I'm like, oh gosh, but it's the same people that are volunteering. But in all the church experiences and schools experiences I've had, we have this sort of joke about, you know, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And so it's not any different, but yet it's just a different environment that I'm experiencing that with. So I'm not sharing any revelation. I'm just sort of feeling like, oh, on one hand, I thought it was going to be positive, and yeah, when it comes to putting the time forth to do it, everybody is conflicted because there's so many things pulling at them. So I don't know what the answer is, but I also wanted to end this conversation with trying to help out on the volunteering side too and trying to figure out. So one of the questions I threw out there for consideration is that is there a new strategy that's needed to secure these folks because they are the future? Um, you know, there are many people in their 60s and 70s who are not going to be able to continue volunteering at the rate that they are today, to be able to continue the work that was started by, previous generations. So, how do we help accelerate this insight so that people are going to make valuable choices about that piece of chocolate that they really want, um, versus trying to do a little bit of everything and not really being able to commit to anything? What do you
Right.
guys think about that?
Yeah. One of the jobs that I had several years ago before I worked for the Medical Society, I was actually a volunteer coordinator, volunteer director, whatever you want to call it, where I had to start from scratch, and it was a nonprofit organization. It was not religious affiliated, so I could go to any. I did recruit a lot of volunteers from churches because those tend to be the people who have the heart for giving up their time and helping out. But what I found was it took an awful lot of one-on-one, a lot, and I was in that role. I was being paid to do this job, and when my volunteers did come in for like an hour shift or whatever it was, um, I mean, I just oozed gratefulness and it was genuine. I just thanked them profusely and tried to make it fun for them. And they really did always come back. I mean, it was always so nice when they actually would come back. A lot of them volunteered their time during their workday. So they would come on a lunch hour or, they would come in a little bit early in the morning or whatever it was. But but I found that one-on-one was just so, important. But I also think we have to hit the reality, and I think we're hitting that on a lot of organizations where we just may not be able to continue. And that when you face that, it's very daunting. It's sort of sad. There are many organizations that have had to close because they just don't have the next generation coming up. And hopefully, the next generation coming up is creating new things. Maybe they're starting new organizations that are more appropriate for now. A lot of the things we talk about, like Lions Club, Rotary, those kinds of things, have been around for 50, 60, maybe more years. And we have to sometimes think, is this really the kind of organization our young people are interested in? So I don't know. I mean, a lot of my volunteer work now is with the church, and the churches really are facing a lot of struggles for various reasons. That's another whole podcast, I'm sure. But I think the parents genuinely want these programs for their children. They want them there. They want the church to provide them. But if there is, and what we're finding at the church where I go, a lot of those volunteer roles are being done by people like me who are older, and and the parents, aren't really stepping in. So I don't have an answer for it, but I think just talking about it out loud and putting this conversation out there to say, I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. I'm here to mentor you. Um, I think that's a step forward.
Yeah, I have two thoughts, Sue. And one of them is you hit the nail on the head in terms of mentoring. I think that there is an opportunity for us to have an honest conversation and to help some of whether they're young or not young, to be able to help them. It's like coaching. It's like helping them understand that what is your priority, and helping them without coming from a place of judgment, knowing that, whatever they choose to commit their time to do, that's where uh, they will flourish. And that's where whatever they invest in will flourish. Right. So there's sort of a comment that says, the grass is greener where you water it. Right. So it's not about, it's a fallacy that we say the grass is greener on the other side, because it's not. It's where you invest your time and where you put your energy. And there's no right or wrong reason, as long as you're okay with that. And I think that when people feel pressured by, whomever that they need volunteers for, they feel like they are caught between a rock and a hard place, and they may not know how to say, I can't help out. I can't do this. I do think that it is not fair to assume that somebody else is going to create the programming for your children, because who is that someone? Right.
Right.
Because the people who provide those courses are the people who want to see those offerings. I mean, I remember when we went to do, classes, catechism, whatever, but you all took up time volunteering to do those things. It's not like someone, quote unquote, was doing that. It was the people who from that church who provided that. So I mean, I think that that's like a double standard that I don't think that's fair. But I think that it's a lot about mentoring, coaching folks to help them say, you know, it's just prioritizing, and sort of what you did in that position, and being able to be clear about that. The other thing that I'm on a bandwagon for from organizations, like, the different, organizations you mentioned that have been around for a long time. I do believe that we need to modernize our way of thinking. And so there's got to be some innovation within um, in the way we do things. I think the young people are very sophisticated with technology. We have to get into virtual things. AI is right around the corner. I think that we have to try to find a way to bring people up to where we are, and not feel that the way it's always been done is the only way that it can be done. And I think you and I talked about that when, we were both working in the medical society and talking about, companies are not paying for people to volunteer their time to drive an hour away to come back for a 30-minute conversation. There's got to be different. And COVID really accelerated that with Zoom and things like that. And, my feedback to the organizations I volunteer with, because I sit on a lot of boards, is that we have to meet the volunteers where they are. no longer are we going to drive people kicking and screaming to participate in something out of goodwill that they have to sacrifice more than they're able to do. And so I do feel like just to be able to say that to why people are looking for volunteers, we have to figure out a way to do that, um, to make it more amenable to our population because that's changing. And so that's something that I always put out there because I do think that most organizations want people to adjust to what their rules are and not evolve. And I think that is going to be the death of some of these organizations because people just don't want to do it the same way that it was. And you're either going to evolve or you're going to die. And it's up to each organization to make that decision. So, Alyssa, you've been quiet. You've been listening. Do you have any final thoughts as we wrap this conversation up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna have you come back because I think we could probably talk for another hour or so. Because I think my wheels were turning, as we're kind of going through. But I definitely think that I agree with both of you. Some of the things that you mentioned, and I think that there is I think there's a lot of factors here. There's the prioritizing of what, the younger generations want to do with their time, but I think there's also like meeting them like you said, Joji, halfway. I'm part of a couple of church organizations and ministries, and we have the same problem. And a lot of times everyone looks to my husband and I to be like, how do we get the younger generations? I'm like, I don't know. We're trying, but I do like what Sue said about that personal touch. And I think that when I reach out to my friends and say, hey, I'm doing this, would you like to join me? I get a much better response. But, my husband and I are just one couple, um, trying to bring other people we do a ministry, for couples within the church. And, I think that it's just like kind of an ongoing conversation, but I appreciate both of your perspectives because I think that there's hopefully, I mean, if we come up with the magic solution, we'll all share it amongst ourselves, but I think that the struggle is real. And I think that it's going to be an ongoing conversation. I have to say, Sue, when you said that, some of these organizations may not continue, I mean, that just makes my heart hurt because there are
Yeah,
some great ones out there. And it's just like, come on, guys. Like, if I could
right.
rally up a bunch of people and be like, let's like keep this alive, I would. But I mean, I see it in our own ministry. I mean, my husband and I are the only couple that have young children. None
Yeah,
of the other couples have young children. They all have grown children, or their, grandchildren. But honestly, we love it because we don't have family around our area. And so we have this extended family of friends who are older than us. And like you said, that mentoring, and that's what brought us into it. And that's what keeps us going. But I think it takes a certain type of personality because my husband and I are also like old souls in some ways, and so we love spending most of our time with the older individuals, and we appreciate the wisdom and all that they bring to it and the mentoring. But there's some people are like, I don't need them to tell me what to do. So I think that it just depends on the personality too. And that's probably, part of the mix. But maybe amongst other conversations, we can all put our heads together and come up with other solutions. But I think that there's some great points here that were made as well.
Okay. Well, any final words, Sue, or shall I close us out?
No, I've really just enjoyed having this conversation and kind of getting it out in the open and hearing different perspectives, and it's been good. I hope it helps other people just talk to each other. As we talked just briefly about AI and Zoom and all those things, which are great. They were great enhancements to our life for the last few years to keep us together. I think it all kind of boils down to a sense of community. And we desperately want it, need it, and yet we kind of push against it. And all the things we're talking about participating and volunteering all brings us together in community. And that's to me, maybe I have my vertedness is coming out, but that's to me where you find commonality, you find joy. And so hopefully, this conversation will help other people just look around for community and where they can find that.
Absolutely, because community is also connection, right? And
Right,
as
right.
humans, we need connection, and yet we're so busy we don't have time for it. So that's the dilemma and the irony of this whole conversation. We really hope that our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as much as we've had doing it. And we really want your input. Those of you who are actively volunteering and how you make those choices, or people who feel that they are one of the individuals who don't have the time and want to add their 2 cents into this conversation, please know that we'd love to have your feedback either through the deconstructedwoman at gmail.com or our podcast platform. Please find a way to get a hold of us and share your thoughts because we would really like to hear um, from you. And so I'd like to thank our guest today, Sue Gem, who was kind enough to offer her time with us tonight. And it's Joji and Alyssa Murray signing off for tonight. So thank you again for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.